The studio was full of noise and energy, a place where bright lights met loud applause and where the air seemed to crackle with excitement. On this particular evening, the famous talk show was buzzing even more than usual. People had come from far and wide to watch two of the most well-known men in the world share a stage. On one side sat Elon Musk, the billionaire visionary known for dreaming of Mars, electric cars, and artificial intelligence. He was smiling confidently, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd as if he already knew what they were thinking. On the other side sat Keanu Reeves, the quiet actor whose face was familiar to millions, but whose heart was known to very few. He sat still, hands folded gently in his lap, his gaze soft and thoughtful, from the moment they walked onto the stage. Their differences were clear. Elon walked quickly, waving to the crowd, giving a short but charming smile that drew cheers. Keanu walked more slowly, almost carefully, nodding politely as he took his seat without a word. The host, a well-known entertainer, welcomed them both with excitement, saying this would be a conversation about the future. The audience clapped loudly, eager to hear what these two men would say. The cameras moved back and forth, catching every angle, every expression, every detail. The energy was electric. Then came the first question from the host, a question that seemed simple but carried great weight. "What do you believe the future of humanity looks like?" he asked, turning first to Elon Musk. Elon leaned forward, eager to answer. With passion in his voice, he spoke about machines, data, progress, and how artificial intelligence would change everything. He painted a picture of cities run by robots, of cars driving themselves, of a world where work was no longer needed because machines would do it all. His words were fast, smooth, filled with confidence. The audience was captivated. Applause broke out as he finished his vision of a future where technology solved every problem. But while Elon spoke, Keanu remained still. He didn't nod, he didn't interrupt. He just listened, his face calm but his eyes deep with thought. There was something different about the way he sat there. It was as if he was not only listening to the words, but also feeling them, turning them over inside himself, weighing them carefully. When Elon finally stopped speaking, the host turned to Keanu and asked gently, "What do you think, Keanu?" But before Keanu could say a word, Elon leaned back and laughed lightly. "Keanu," he said, "what do you think about that?" "Pretty exciting, right?" The audience laughed too. The atmosphere was playful, but there was a tension underneath. They all seemed to expect Keanu to smile, to agree, maybe to stay quiet. As Elon took the lead. But then something unexpected happened. Keanu slowly leaned forward, placing his elbows gently on the table in front of him. He took a breath, long and steady, and then looked directly at Elon. There was no anger in his eyes, no challenge. Only softness, but also something deeper, a sadness mixed with wisdom. His voice, when it came, was quiet but carried across the entire room. It was the kind of voice that made people stop what they were doing just to listen. "Before you go on," Keanu said gently, "can I ask, have you ever paused to think what this means for real people?" The words hung in the air like a sudden hush. It was as if the noise of the room, the applause, even the cameras had all stopped in that single moment. The audience sat still, holding their breath, unsure what to expect next. Even the host looked surprised, caught off guard by Keanu's unexpected question. Elon blinked, his smile fading just a little. "Real people?" he asked, raising one eyebrow. Keanu nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his tone soft but steady. The lonely man driving a bus late at night. The young woman working 2 jobs to care for her child. The old man sitting alone on a park bench. The artist who struggles to create something beautiful, even though the world may never notice. Do they have a place in your future? Will they still matter when machines do everything better than they can? His words were simple, but they carried weight far beyond the surface. The studio, so loud just moments before, had fallen completely silent. Every face in the crowd was turned toward Keanu now, their eyes wide, their bodies leaning forward. It was as if they could all feel the depth behind his words. Elon opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it again, clearly thinking he was not used to being challenged this way, not by data, numbers, or arguments, but by emotion, by human stories. For a brief moment, even Elon Musk, the man known for having answers to everything, seemed at a loss for words. The host quickly stepped in, trying to lighten the mood. "That's an interesting point, Keanu," he said with a nervous laugh. "But surely progress is good for everyone, isn't it?" But Keanu did not look at the host. His eyes remained fixed gently on Elon, as if he was speaking only to him, and no one else. "It's easy to talk about billions," he continued softly, "but do you see the one person in front of you?" His words struck something deep. There was a pause, then a sound no one expected, a single clap. An older woman sitting near the front row had begun to applaud quietly, her face wet with tears. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire audience was clapping slowly, warmly, not with excitement, but with deep emotion. Keanu sat back quietly, folding his hands once more. He did not smile or bow. He simply waited, his expression thoughtful, almost sad. He was not there to win an argument. He was there to remind everyone, even Elon Musk, of something they might have forgotten. And finally spoke, his voice softer. "Now, I don't know how to answer that," he said honestly. The audience leaned in even more, waiting to hear what would come next. But Keanu said nothing further. His question was enough for now. The host, still looking a little shaken, cleared his throat and promised that they would return after a short break. But even as the cameras stopped rolling and the lights dimmed slightly, the atmosphere in the room remained heavy, filled with emotion. People whispered to each other, not about robots or AI, but about human beings, about kindness, respect, and the value of listening. Behind the scenes, crew members moved quietly, as if afraid to break the spell that had fallen over the room. Even Elon seemed to sit a little differently now, his confident posture softened, his smile replaced by thoughtful silence. The talk show had just begun, but already something powerful had happened. In just a few soft-spoken words, Keanu Reeves had changed the entire mood of the evening, reminding everyone that beyond all the talk of machines and data, it was human connection that mattered most. And what would happen next? No one could have predicted. The story will continue. The studio returned from the break, but the mood had shifted entirely. Where moments earlier there had been laughter and applause, now there was a heavy silence, almost sacred. People whispered softly to each other, their eyes still fixed on the stage. They were waiting, not for jokes or flashy promises, but for something real, something human. The cameras began to roll again, the lights brightened, and the host, trying to recover the energy, smiled as he spoke. "We are back with Elon Musk and Keanu Reeves. And things just got a little deeper than we expected." His voice carried a nervous edge, a thin laugh hiding his discomfort. He turned quickly to Elon and asked, "So Elon, how do you respond to what Keanu just said about real people? About seeing the one person in front of you?" Elon leaned forward, fingers tapping gently on the table. His confidence was still there, but it was no longer playful. His expression was serious now, thoughtful, even a little vulnerable. "I understand where Keanu is coming from," he began, his tone measured. "But progress is inevitable. We cannot stop it. We must move forward, faster, better, smarter. Technology doesn't wait for feelings." His words were logical, precise, but they felt cold compared to the warmth of Keanu's earlier question. Some in the audience nodded in agreement, but most remained silent, still affected by Keanu's emotional challenge. Keanu, sitting still as ever, spoke again. His voice was even softer this time, almost a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the studio. "I am not asking to stop progress," he said gently. "I'm only asking, as we move forward, do we remember who we are leaving behind?" His words cut through the air like a soft breeze that could still move mountains. The audience listened closely, leaning in, drawn to every word. Then Keanu did something unexpected. He turned slightly in his seat, his body relaxed, and began to speak not to Elon directly, but to the entire room, as if every person mattered equally. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "Some years ago, I was waiting for a bus late at night. It was cold, almost freezing, and I was sitting alone at the stop. A stranger sat beside me, an old man wearing a thin coat. I could see he was shivering. We didn't speak for a long time. We just sat together, sharing the silence. And then, he offered me half of his sandwich. The studio was quiet, as if the lights themselves had dimmed to listen more carefully. He didn't know who I was," Keanu continued softly. "I was just another cold man at a lonely bus stop. He didn't ask for anything. He just shared what little he had." Keanu's voice almost broke with emotion, but he kept speaking, steady and calm. That moment stayed with me. It wasn't about wealth or success or progress. It was about kindness. Simple human kindness. Elon watched him closely now, his expression unreadable. The host looked down at his notes, clearly unsure how to continue. This wasn't the conversation anyone had planned. Suddenly, a surprising thing happened. A woman in the audience, sitting near the back, wiped her eyes and stood up. She clapped once, slowly, deliberately. Then another person stood, and another. Soon, almost the entire audience was on their feet, clapping softly, their faces touched by emotion. But Keanu didn't stand or smile. He remained seated, his hands folded gently on his lap, his expression thoughtful, almost distant. He wasn't looking for praise. He wasn't trying to win. He was simply sharing a truth that had shaped his heart. Elon finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before. I see your point," he said slowly. "But kindness can't build rockets. Kindness won't get us to Mars. Kindness doesn't solve technical problems." Keanu turned his gaze back to Elon, meeting his eyes gently. "Maybe not," he said, "but kindness can solve something far greater. The problem of feeling alone. The problem of being forgotten." His words were soft, but they echoed in every corner of the room. The audience sat down slowly, still clapping softly, their faces thoughtful. There was no shouting, no debate, just a quiet agreement that what they had witnessed was important. The host cleared his throat again, his usual quick humor replaced by a deep respect. "Keanu," he said carefully, "that was beautiful. But, Elon, surely you agree that technology can also help people. It can connect us, can't it?" Elon nodded slowly. "Yes, of course," he said, his tone serious. "But it's easy to forget that when we're racing ahead." Keanu smiled gently. "For the first time that evening. Then maybe that's the lesson tonight," he said softly. "That we must not forget." The audience reacted with another warm wave of applause, this time not just for Keanu's words, but for the quiet moment of understanding that had begun to bloom between the two men. But deep down, everyone watching could sense that this was only the beginning. Something larger was unfolding, something no one in that studio or watching from home could have expected. Because while Elon Musk was known for thinking of the future, Keanu Reeves had just reminded everyone of the present and the value of every human being in it. The story will continue. The studio felt different now, quieter, softer, as if everyone in the room was still thinking about what had just been said. But underneath that quiet, a new kind of energy was building, a quiet tension that made every eye turn toward Elon Musk and Keanu Reeves once again. The host leaned forward, his hands folded nervously on the table. He didn't want to rush. This moment, but the cameras were still rolling, and he knew the world was watching. "So," he said carefully, "Elon, what do you think of what Keanu just shared? About kindness, about the one person in front of you?" Elon took a deep breath. For a few seconds he didn't speak. He tapped his fingers on the table slowly, thinking, searching for the right words. Finally, he sat up straight and spoke. His voice calm but carrying a quiet firmness. "I understand the emotion behind this," he said, "but we have to be practical. Emotion is unpredictable. It's unreliable. Logic is what gets us to solutions. Logic is what drives us forward. The future belongs to those who think with reason, not with feelings." His words were smooth, practiced, but they carried an edge now. A hint of challenge, a quiet question aimed straight at Keanu. The audience listened carefully, some nodding in agreement, others looking unsure. Keanu did not answer right away. He sat back in his chair, folding his arms gently, his eyes downcast as if lost in thought. Then, after a long pause, he looked up and met Elon's gaze directly. His voice, when it came, was soft but full of weight. "I don't disagree with you," he said gently. "Reason is important. Logic is essential. But without feeling, without empathy, logic can become dangerous." His words carried across the studio like a ripple in still water. The audience leaned in, caught in the delicate balance of this conversation. Two brilliant men from very different worlds, sharing thoughts that felt larger than themselves. Keanu continued, his tone patient but deliberate. "Let me tell you something," he said. "Many years ago, I was walking home late at night. I passed a woman sitting alone on a bench. She looked lost, distant, holding a photo in her hands. Something told me to stop, so I did. I sat beside her. I didn't ask questions, didn't try to fix anything. I just sat there quietly, letting her know she wasn't alone. After a while, she looked at me and said, 'Thank you for just being here.'" His story was simple, but it held a deep truth that touched everyone in the room. No flashy technology, no grand solution, just presence, kindness, and patience. Elon shifted in his seat, clearly unsettled but trying not to show it. He smiled faintly, but the confidence in that smile was thinner now. "Keanu," he said softly, "you live in a dream. That kind of world, it's beautiful, but it's not real. The real world is harsh, competitive. If we slow down for every emotional moment, we will never reach Mars, never unlock the full power of AI. We must move fast, faster than our feelings." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression gentle, almost sad. "But if we move so fast that we stop feeling," he said, "what kind of future are we building? What good is reaching Mars if we forget how to care about the people around us?" The audience sat in absolute silence, their eyes moving back and forth between the two men. It felt like watching two different futures fighting to be heard, one built on logic and progress, the other on empathy and connection. The host cleared his throat, his voice softer now. I think everyone watching can feel the importance of this moment," he said. "But Elon, surely kindness and progress can exist together, can't they?" Elon hesitated, his usual quick answers slow to come. He looked at Keanu, really looked at him for the first time that evening, as if trying to understand the quiet strength behind the actor's gentle words. Then, something unexpected happened. A slight crack in Elon's voice as he spoke next. "Keanu," he said carefully, "you talk about feelings. But I don't know how to feel that way." His admission was raw, almost painful. The audience reacted with a soft gasp, sensing the vulnerability behind those words. Even Keanu seemed surprised, his expression softening further. Elon continued, his tone lower, almost a whisper. "My whole life, I've lived with numbers, data, logic. I built my companies that way. I solved problems that way. But This empathy you speak of, I don't know how to find it." Keanu's response was immediate, warm, and without judgment. He leaned forward, his eyes kind, his voice steady. "That's okay, Elon," he said gently. "Feeling starts with listening, and tonight, you're listening." His simple statement struck deep, not only in Elon but in everyone watching. It was a reminder that empathy didn't require perfection. It only required openness. The studio felt transformed. Now not by flashy debates or quick arguments, but by the slow unfolding of something truly human, understanding. And as the cameras captured the moment, Elon Musk leaning forward quietly, Keanu Reeves speaking softly, and the audience holding their breath, it was clear that this was more than a talk show. This was a conversation about the future of the human heart. The story will continue. The cameras kept rolling, but no one seemed to notice them anymore. The bright lights that had once felt sharp and artificial now felt softer, as if they too were leaning in, listening carefully to what was unfolding. The entire studio was wrapped in an unusual silence, not the cold silence of discomfort, but the warm quiet that happens when people are deeply moved. Elon Musk sat still, his usual playful smile gone. Instead, there was a look of reflection on his face, the kind of look that comes when someone begins to realize that they might not have all the answers after all. Keanu Reeves remained calm, his presence steady and kind, not pushing, not forcing, just quietly waiting for whatever might come next. The host, who normally would jump in with another question or a joke to lift the mood, simply sat back for once, watching the two men with a look of quiet respect. He understood that something rare was happening, something that could not be rushed or scripted. Finally, Elon spoke again, but this time his voice was different. It was softer, almost uncertain, like a man remembering something from long ago that he had locked away. "Keanu," he began slowly, "you speak about empathy like it's easy, but it's not easy for me. When I was a child, I didn't have that. I didn't grow up with warmth. I grew up needing to solve problems. Quickly, efficiently. Emotions, they didn't solve anything. They just made things harder." His admission felt like a weight being placed gently in the center of the room. The audience listened carefully, many leaning forward, their faces softening as they heard this unexpected vulnerability from a man who was usually so composed, so controlled. Keanu didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he simply nodded, as if giving Elon permission to take his time. Then, after a quiet pause, he spoke with deep gentleness. "It's not easy for anyone," he said softly. "And it's okay to admit that. We all carry things from our past, things that shape how we see the world. But we are not trapped by them. We can change, we can learn." Elon looked down at his hands, his fingers loosely intertwined, as if searching for something solid to hold on to. "Sometimes I feel disconnected," he admitted quietly. "Surrounded by people, by teams, by endless meetings, but still alone." His words touched a deep chord in the audience. It was an admission that felt raw and real, the kind of truth that so many people carry quietly inside themselves, but rarely speak out loud. Even behind success and fame, there can be loneliness. Even in a crowded room, a person can feel unseen. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes full of compassion. "You're not alone right now," he said gently. "Look around you, Elon. These people, they're listening. They're here. I'm here." The simplicity of his words carried immense power. It wasn't a grand solution or a clever answer. It was just presence, the offering of being there, of standing beside someone who felt alone. The audience reacted not with cheers, but with quiet understanding. A woman in the front row wiped a tear from her eye. A man near the back nodded slowly, his face full of emotion. Even the studio crew, usually so busy and focused on their work, stood still listening, some holding their breath. Then Elon did something no one expected. He smiled, not his usual confident, polished smile, but a small, fragile smile that seemed to say, "Thank you," without words. He reached out slowly and placed his hand gently on the table between them. Not quite a handshake, not quite a gesture of agreement, but simply a human gesture of connection. Keanu responded in kind. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over Elon's, holding it softly but firmly, as if to say, "I see you, and you matter." The camera zoomed in, capturing the moment in close detail. Two men from very different worlds, brought together not by argument or debate, but by vulnerability and kindness. The host finally spoke, his voice soft and respectful. This is why we have these conversations," he said. "Not just to talk about ideas, but to understand each other as people." The audience responded with a warm, sustained applause, not loud and wild, but steady and heartfelt, full of appreciation for what they had just witnessed. As the applause continued, Elon looked at Keanu and spoke again, his tone lighter but still thoughtful. "You know," he said, "maybe I've been building all these machines, these rockets, because I was afraid to face this part of myself." His honesty surprised even himself, but Keanu simply smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "It takes courage to face yourself," he said gently. "And maybe that's the greatest kind of courage there is." The audience nodded, many wiping their eyes, deeply moved by the exchange. The mood in the room had completely transformed. What began as a debate had become something deeper, a human moment of connection, respect, and healing. As the segment drew to a close, the host thanked them both sincerely, promising that the next part of the conversation would explore how empathy could guide progress, not stand in its way. But even as the cameras faded to a commercial break, the feeling in the room remained, a quiet warmth, a shared humanity, and a reminder that no matter how successful, brilliant, or famous a person might become, we all long to be seen, to be heard, and to be understood. The story will continue. The studio lights seemed softer now, as if they too had adjusted to the new atmosphere that had quietly taken over the room. It was no longer a stage for arguments or clever answers. It had become a space of listening, of empathy, of vulnerability. As the cameras resumed their slow, careful movements, it felt like everyone watching, whether in the audience or at home, was leaning forward, not wanting to miss a single word or expression. The host, who usually moved the conversation along briskly, now chose to let the moment breathe. He smiled gently and said, "There's a beautiful honesty here tonight. I'd like to ask you both, what have you learned from this conversation so far?" Elon Musk paused. This time he didn't rush into an answer. He looked down for a moment, then turned his gaze toward Keanu Reeves, almost as if seeking permission to speak honestly. When he finally spoke, his words were slower, more thoughtful than before. "I've spent so much of my life trying to solve problems," he said softly, "trying to fix things, to build things that would make life easier or better. But tonight, I realize I have overlooked something important. I haven't always paused to think about the people right in front of me." There was a humility in his voice that hadn't been there before. It wasn't an admission of defeat, but an acknowledgement of growth, a quiet moment of reflection that felt genuine and real. Keanu listened carefully, nodding slowly. His expression was gentle, his eyes warm, filled with kindness. "That's all anyone can do," he said in his soft, steady voice. "We all miss things sometimes. We all forget to notice the people around us. But when we recognize that, when we pause and choose to listen, that's when we really begin to connect." His words wrapped around the room like a soft blanket, comforting but also inspiring. It felt as though a weight had been lifted, as if the audience could finally exhale after holding their breath through so much tension. Then Keanu shared another story, one that seemed small on the surface but carried deep meaning. "Years ago," he began quietly, "I was filming in a city I didn't know well. One evening, after a long day, I sat alone in a little cafe. I was tired, lonely, really. Then the waitress came over, and she didn't just take my order. She sat down beside me for a minute. She asked me how I was, not as a celebrity, but as a person. That moment stayed with me. She didn't need to do that. But she did. She showed kindness. The audience listened in rapt silence. It wasn't a story about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about something simple, something profoundly human. Being present for someone else, even in a fleeting moment. ELO and leaned back slightly, his face thoughtful. He seemed to be turning Keanu's story over in his mind, weighing its meaning. You're saying that it's the small moments that matter? He asked softly. Keanu smiled gently. Yes, he said. The world is built on small moments. On kindness shared between strangers, on quiet understanding, on simply being there for someone when they need it. The audience responded with a soft, warm applause, not loud or wild, but steady and heartfelt, a reflection of their deep connection to the conversation unfolding before them. Then, in a surprising moment of honesty, Elon said, I think maybe I've been afraid of small moments. Afraid they would slow me down, make me lose focus. Keanu's gaze softened even more. We all feel that way sometimes, he said gently. But small moments are not obstacles. They are reminders. Reminders of why we build things, why we dream of better futures. It's for the people in front of us, not just the possibilities ahead. The host finally spoke again, his voice tender, almost reverent. This is beautiful, he said. I think many of us needed to hear this tonight. The cameras captured every detail, the thoughtful look on Elon's face, the peaceful calm in Keanu's expression, the quiet tears in the eyes of some audience members. There was no rush to finish, no pressure to move to the next topic. Instead, there was space for reflection, for feeling, for being present together. And in that shared moment, something remarkable happened. Elon reached out again, this time not hesitantly, but with quiet confidence, and shook Keanu's hand firmly. Their handshake wasn't for show. It was a genuine gesture of respect, a recognition that two very different men, from very different worlds, had found common ground. The audience erupted into a soft but sustained applause, some rising to their feet, others wiping their eyes, all deeply moved by the honesty and kindness they had just witnessed. And through it all, Keanu remained as he always had been, steady, calm, gentle. He wasn't trying to win an argument or prove a point. He was simply offering kindness, presence, and empathy. As the segment drew to a close, the host leaned forward and said, We often talk about progress, about moving fast. But maybe tonight we learned that slowing down to listen, to understand, is also progress. The audience nodded, many still quietly emotional. And as the lights dimmed gently and the cameras prepared to fade out for the next break, the atmosphere in the studio felt completely transformed. It wasn't just a show anymore, it had become a shared experience, a reminder of what truly matters in life. As the final segment of the evening began, the atmosphere in the studio felt unlike anything that had come before it. There was no longer the electric, almost aggressive energy of a typical talk show. Instead, a calm warmth filled the room, like the soft glow that remains after a storm has passed. People were no longer leaning forward to see who would win an argument. They were leaning forward because they cared, because they felt something honest and human unfolding before their eyes. The host, usually full of humor and quick remarks, now spoke softly, almost as if afraid to break the fragile beauty of the moment. Keanu, Elon, he said gently, before we close tonight, is there anything you'd like to leave us with? One final thought to carry with us after the lights go down? Elon glanced at Keanu first. There was a quiet respect in his gaze now, a sense that he no longer saw Keanu as just a famous actor, but as a person who had touched something deep inside him. Keanu, Elon said quietly, I'd like you to answer first." Keanu nodded. Gently, folding his hands on the table before him, he took a breath, looking out across the audience, an audience that had laughed, cried, and sat in stillness with him throughout this unexpected journey. His voice was soft but clear, carrying the quiet authority that comes only from deep understanding. "Tonight we've talked a lot about the future," he began, "about progress and technology, about speed and solutions. But maybe what matters most isn't what we will build tomorrow, but how we treat each other today." The audience sat in absolute silence, hanging on every word. Even the cameras seemed to move more gently now, slowly zooming in to capture the quiet intensity on Keanu's face. "We can dream of Mars," Keanu continued. "We can build machines that think faster than any human. But if we lose our connection to each other, if we forget to care, then what kind of future are we really creating?" His words struck a deep chord. There was no anger in them, no judgment, only a deep, quiet sadness and an urgent hope. He wasn't telling anyone what to do. He was reminding them who they are. And then Keanu did something unexpected, something that made the entire studio gasp softly. He turned to Elon, looked him in the eyes with deep kindness, and said, "Elon, I admire you, your mind, your vision. They inspire millions, but please remember, the most beautiful future is one where we do not leave our hearts behind." There was a long pause. The host sat back, speechless. Even Elon looked moved, his usual sharpness softened by the depth of Keanu's words. And then, slowly, Elon smiled, a real smile, not the practiced grin of a public figure, but the genuine, warm smile of a man who had felt something shift inside him. "Thank you, Keanu," he said softly. "Maybe that's what I needed to hear all along." The audience responded not with loud cheers, but with soft applause, the kind that comes from people who know they have just witnessed something rare and beautiful. Many wiped their eyes. Others simply held their hands together in quiet respect. Host finally found his voice again, his tone full of sincerity. "This," he said slowly, "has been one of the most meaningful conversations we've ever had on this stage. Thank you both for your honesty, your vulnerability, and your kindness." But even as the cameras began to pan out for the closing shot, Keanu had one more thing to say. He turned back to the audience, his eyes kind, his voice steady. "We rush so much in life," he said gently, "but maybe tonight, we can all remember to slow down, to see the person in front of us, to listen, to care, because at the end of the day, we are all human, and that is what makes us truly extraordinary." His final words left the entire studio in a peaceful silence. It was not the kind of silence that felt empty. It was full, rich with meaning, carrying the weight of all that had been said and felt that evening. And as the lights slowly dimmed and the cameras faded out, everyone knew that something important had happened. It wasn't just a talk show anymore. It was a reminder, a gentle but powerful reminder, that kindness, respect, humility, and resilience are what truly shape the future. No matter how fast technology moves or how far we travel, the story had come full circle, and in doing so, had touched every heart that had listened. The story has ended.